This is The Guy Gordon Show on News Talk 760 WJR.
I'm going to give you a visual, and it may be uncomfortable, so I'm going to give you a disclaimer on that. I want you to picture a beautiful fall Saturday afternoon at the Big House in Ann Arbor. Stadium's packed, more than 100,000 strong. Now imagine them all dead of drug overdoses. That's the size of the crowd and the humanity that we lose every year to opioid overdoses. It's 100,000 people. Today, the Food and Drug Administration took a step forward to hopefully reverse some of those numbers and to shrink that crowd. It is going to take Narcan, which is the drug that can reverse a drug overdose, and make it available over the counter to try to expand its accessibility, to try to save lives. Just how impactful will it be? How many lives could we reasonably see saved through the increased availability? Let's discuss it with a nationally known treatment expert. Jaimie Clayton is president and CEO of Oakland Family Services. I have served on their board, full disclosure, for over 30 years. And they are the leaders in helping families deal with addiction and substance abuse. Jaimie, good afternoon.
Hi, Guy. Thanks for having me.
I know this is something that you've been watching for.
Yes.
How much of a game changer could this be? Are there any reliable predictions about the kind of impact this could have?
I don't know that we know the size and scale yet, but anytime you can increase access to something that can have this kind of impact, we know it will be measurable. There will be a measurable difference by this action.
So where do you foresee people being able to access this? And is this something that could be abused? I mean, if they put vending machines on college campuses or in areas where there might be drug users, or, you know, if it's made available through vending machines, is it anything that anybody could abuse and take for a high or anything like that?
Yeah. No, so let's disabuse everybody of that. There's absolutely no upside unless you're in the middle of an overdose. None. Can't get high. There's no, you can't use this too much. It is literally an agent that only interacts when you're using specific opioids to reverse that action. Sometimes it takes more than one round, but that's based on the amount of drugs and the strength that are in your system. So there's no chance out there we're creating another dependency. This only has upside. For lack of a better term, it basically acts as a prophylactic for your brain, doesn't it? Yeah, I mean it's an antagonist in that way. So it just basically it's a chemical reaction that reverses, the overdose, that part of the physical reaction to the opioids. And with the, huge increase we've seen with fentanyl and people not even knowing they're getting fentanyl, which is far more deadly than some of the opioids people think they're taking, this is just, like I said, it's a game changer. In terms of where you might be able to get it, so that still remains to be seen. This is not going to happen tomorrow. They're thinking late summer. The drug manufacturer has to change things slightly from the prescription format, and then has to price it, which we can talk about in a second. Mm-hmm. And then stores have to be willing to take it. There's an expectation that this should be like an over-counter antacid. You should be able to get this at your big box stores, your pharmacies, and, some of us would hope even like your 7-Eleven and gas stations would carry it, because those are some essential places that people who might be using might pick it up. Pricing is going to be an issue. So people might not be aware that right now most states have a standing order that pharmacists can actually give out Narcan if someone goes to the pharmacy and asks for it. There's a standing order. Some pharmacies won't do that. They're not comfortable with the implications.
Well, I mean, and that's a real problem, Jaimie. I mean, according to what I saw in the New York Times today, only 15% of pharmacies will distribute this. I mean, we had 17 million doses, but only 15% came out of pharmacies because I guess they're worried about in their minds attracting the wrong element.
Well, I think it's attracting the wrong element, but I also think there's a sense of liability because just because there's a standing order, it still was being considered and distributed like a prescription medication, whereas now it's going to be taken, generic and off-label, and the same liability won't apply. But I think there's going to be a lot of work still around stigma. If you don't want to attract the wrong people, we have to help there be less people with addiction problems. And honestly, it's going to be family members and friends who go by this as much as people who are using. People who are in the throes of addiction are not necessarily thinking, hey, I'm going to also carry with me what's going to save my life. That's not their main focus. We hope with education that might happen, but really you're much more talking about, a mother who is watching her child suffer, maybe trying to get them in treatment and keeps Narcan in the house as a fallback. Roommates, those kinds of things are going to have huge impact, but there will need to be education campaigns. You and I spoke at length also, I think it was probably maybe even this time last year, around safe injection sites and kind of stigma that goes with that, in the sense that if we make these things more accessible, people will just use more drugs because it will be easier. And that's such a misnomer. No one's going to increase their heroin use because they might get Narcan and not overdose.
Well, but though there is, let me tell you something. When I was a kid in the 60s, they scared the daylights out of us about heroin and overdoses.
Yeah.
They showed us Needle in Central Park, or what it was, the movie.
Course.
It was, okay, so I got to tell you, I never got into it because it scared me to death. If you remove the fear of overdose, might it take away some of the stigma to first-timers? Well, I've got a backstop. My buddy's got Narcan.
Around the fringes at the best guy, most people don't wake up with the idea so you had that lens and you probably weren't going to get from A to D of shooting heroin anyway. Maybe that was one factor, but your life wasn't going to go in that way, and maybe your brain and chemical makeup weren't going to work the way for you to be addicted. So maybe that, impacts a couple people on the fringes. But again, if you're in the throes of addiction, in Narcan, you can still experience withdrawal symptoms. And what most people will tell you is they end up wanting to not use because of withdrawal more than the fear of overdose. If you are using substances to the point of addiction and misuse where overdose is a significant threat, it is not the thing you're thinking about. You don't care. In fact, you could be thinking it would be great to overdose because you're living in misery. Not like, hey, I'm going to do the one thing that allows me to keep using. There's so many steps that happen before that. Now, the other thing is there's a lot of accidental overdose. Someone thinks they're using something that is a lower level and it's not going to harm them, and it's cut with fentanyl. We have a lot of kids who overdose accidentally, not because they're in the throes of a daily heroin addiction. And this can be life-saving. But the other piece is none of these harm reduction strategies that any of us in the treatment world endorse go without talking about treatment and access to care. It's one fallback to try to decrease overdose while we're increasing people's desire for treatment or willingness to engage in treatment services. It's
you can't save a dead addict. This is critical to loved ones who are trying to buy time.
That's what it is, exactly.
But the one thing you mentioned, this might be family members or roommates, things like that.
Yep.
I saw a couple of interviews today with moms who lost their kids to fentanyl poisoning, who said, gosh, I never would have thought to have this in the home because I didn't even know they were experimenting with anything. We know the mom here in Michigan that testified to Congress that said my two boys tried Percocet and were both killed.
Yeah.
These kids may be experimenting with stuff that they don't know is laced with fentanyl. So who should be thinking about this once it does become more available?
Well, I think in the treatment world, I just saw a doctor actually on TV when we were talking about this should become something that people just treat like a first aid kit item, because you don't know what's going on and who may need it. So all of us who could have it should have it. It's not going to catch every case, though. So those tragic cases that you talk about, those can still happen. we just have to be honest with ourselves. But the more education we do about use and addiction and treatment and tools like this, just like talking about and destigmatizing methadone. I mean, all the aspects that we have that we can put in our toolbox to help people, like you said, stay alive so they can get treatment when they're ready, are the things we need to be using. So just the more people we can get it to, even if you don't think you need it, having it on hand, you don't know who you could help.
Well, let's hope that they clear up the remaining regulatory wrinkles here. Yeah. Also, the issue of whether this will be covered.
And make it affordable if it's not.
Yeah. Jaimie, thanks so much. I love the work you do, and I love the way you explain this in such a nice, clear way, and we appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Guy. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, and hopefully we can look back a year from now and say, hey, that's no longer a six-figure number, that we can shave some victims off of.
About use and addiction and treatment and tools like this, just like talking about and destigmatizing methadone. I mean, all the aspects that we have that we can put in our toolbox to help people, like you said, stay alive so they can get treatment when they're ready, are the things we need to be using. So just the more people we can get it to, even if you don't think you need it, having it on hand, you don't know who you could help.
Well, let's hope that they clear up the remaining regulatory wrinkles here. Yeah. Also, the issue of whether this will be covered.
And make it affordable if it's not.
Yeah. Jaimie, thanks so much. I love the work you do, and I love the way you explain this in such a nice, clear way, and we appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Guy. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, and hopefully we can look back a year from now and say, hey, that's no longer a six-figure number, that we can shave some victims off of.